The early morning sun burned gold over the sprawling Virginia training base, glinting off helmets and rifles as recruits lined up in precise formation. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder, sweat, and freshly churned earth. Lieutenant Mark Reynolds stood at the edge of the field, arms crossed, jaw tight. His eyes scanned the platoon, a sharp, practiced gaze that missed nothing. Every muscle in his body screamed discipline. Every twitch of his jaw whispered impatience. He had seen recruits before, eager, reckless, undisciplined. But today, something was different. Something unsettling. She walked onto the field like any other recruit, but her presence immediately stood out. Dark hair tucked tightly into a standard-issue bun, uniform pressed and spotless, boots laced perfectly. Every inch of her screamed control. She was calm, collected, and absolutely unyielding. Mark hadn't yet seen her name tag. No insignia. No rank. Nothing. But when she moved, it was with a precision that suggested experience far beyond a trainee. Mark barked out the first set of commands, his voice cutting through the morning air. Platoon forward. Double time, double time. The group surged forward in a synchronized stamp of boots against dirt. The woman fell in step, effortlessly keeping pace. But then, during a simulated breach exercise, she paused, tilted her head, and corrected one of his orders. Mark stopped mid-step, his eyes narrowing. "Excuse me, soldier?" His voice, sharp and unyielding, carried over the roar of the trainees. "I believe the trajectory of approach would put Team Bravo at unnecessary risk," she said, her voice calm, almost soft, but firm enough to cut through the tension. A murmur ran through the platoon. He had seen challenge before, yes, but never with this. Poise. Mark stepped forward, the gravel crunching under his boots. "Are you questioning me?" His words carried authority and danger, a warning to any recruit who dared to challenge him. She didn't flinch. "I'm suggesting a safer alternative," she replied. There was no hesitation, no fear, just confidence, measured and precise. Mark felt a flash of irritation ripple through him. Pride, honed over years of leadership, bristled at this insubordination. "Do you think this is a negotiation?" He snapped, his voice rising, tinged with anger. "You follow orders. That's how this works." The recruits froze in the heat of the moment, watching the interaction like a live wire. Some glanced nervously at one another. Others held their breath. No one had ever seen Mark Reynolds lose his cool, at least not publicly. "I follow orders that make sense," she said evenly, her gaze unwavering. "Otherwise, lives get hurt. And I refuse to be responsible for preventable mistakes." Mark's chest tightened. Something about her tone, her calm defiance, ignited a fury he hadn't felt in years. He wanted to assert dominance, to crush this insolence immediately. Yet beneath the irritation, an unfamiliar sensation tugged at him, respect. Something about her precision, her command over her body, her refusal to buckle, it hinted at experience. Real experience. Dangerous experience. Mark swallowed hard and barked a new order, trying to reclaim authority. "Everyone, reset positions. And you back in line, soldier." She complied, but with a measured step that suggested she was not intimidated. The rest of the platoon watched as if witnessing a silent duel. Mark could feel the weight of every eye on him, judging, measuring, waiting to see who would break first. The next drill was a high-intensity tactical exercise. Teams were split for simulated urban combat, clearing buildings, rescuing hostages, engaging targets. Mark's team executed orders with military precision, but she, with uncanny foresight, anticipated every move. She blocked one of his maneuvers, adjusted team placements, and even corrected tactical mistakes before they escalated. Mark's jaw tightened. Each correction felt like a personal slight, a challenge to his authority. He clenched his fists behind his back, trying not to act impulsively. But every fiber of his being screamed, "Assert control now. Don't let her undermine your command." The final exercise of the morning brought both teams into a chaotic urban mock-up. Smoke filled the air, alarms blared, and chaos reigned. Mark's frustration boiled over when she stopped mid-command to redirect the squad away from an imagined crossfire. "Enough!" Mark shouted, marching up to her. "Do you even realize what you're doing? Orders are orders. You're not here to improvise." Her eyes met his, calm, unyielding, dangerous. "Orders are only as good as the people they protect, Lieutenant. Lives matter more than pride." The tension hung like a blade over the platoon. Time seemed to stretch. Recruits looked away, uncomfortable but captivated. Mark realized, with a jolt, that this was no ordinary recruit. The precision, the composure, the sheer fearlessness. It wasn't just training. This was combat experience. Someone who had been in the field, under fire, where hesitation meant death. Mark took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. He could feel the first sting of something he hadn't expected. Fear. Not of her physically, but fear of being outmatched in knowledge, in judgment, in instinct. His pride, carefully honed over years of service, was under threat. The morning ended with the platoon resting in formation. Sweat dripped down foreheads. Boots were scuffed, weapons were dust-covered, contempors were frayed. Mark tried to shake off the lingering tension, but he kept glancing at her. She cleaned her gear methodically, serene, as if nothing had happened. Yet her calm intensity burned in his mind like an unspoken challenge. As the recruits dispersed, Mark remained, staring at the woman whose name he still did not know. Every instinct told him to assert control, to put her in her place. But a nagging doubt whispered, this was someone who couldn't be broken by anger, who wouldn't bend to rank or bluster. And deep down, he knew that this was only the beginning. Whatever she was hiding, and Mark suspected there was something, the coming days would test him in ways he had never imagined. He had entered the field thinking he was in charge. But by the end of this morning, he realized that authority alone might not be enough. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the training ground. Mark clenched his fists, jaw tight, and whispered under his breath, "We'll see about that, soldier. We'll see." The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the training field, baking the dust into thick, choking clouds. Lieutenant Mark Reynolds paced behind his team, the weight of frustration pressing on him like a heavy pack. Every command he gave seemed to be subtly undermined, every order challenged. And the one person who stood out among the recruits, the one whose very presence made his blood run hotter than the summer heat, had no name tag, no rank, and no intention of bowing to him. Her name, he would later learn, was Eva Harris. But for now, she remained simply the anomaly that refused to obey the rhythm of his drills. The scenario that afternoon was a simulated ambush in a mock urban landscape, a labyrinth of shipping containers, stacked crates, and narrow alleyways. Teams were split into attackers and defenders. Mark's unit, leading the offensive, moved like a tide against their opponents, shouting orders, communicating in clipped, precise signals. But Eva, still unmarked, moved differently. She anticipated obstacles before they appeared, repositioned soldiers with subtle gestures, and corrected errors without a hint of hesitation. Mark's irritation grew with every second. A commanding officer was supposed to be obeyed. Discipline was supposed to be absolute. Yet here she was, calm and precise, reshaping the battlefield under his very nose. He motioned her aside during a critical maneuver. "Lieutenant, step aside and let me handle this." His tone was sharp, almost venomous. She didn't move. Instead, she met his gaze, her eyes steady and unyielding. "Lieutenant Reynolds, if we continue down this path, Team Charlie will be flanked. Casualties are likely. Adjust your approach." Mark froze. Casualties. The word hit him like a bullet. She wasn't merely a know-it-all recruit. She was calculating, thinking about lives. Not drill points. Not appearances. Lives. "Excuse me?" He barked, stepping closer, his face flushed with a mix of anger and disbelief. "I'm advising, not questioning. But if you insist on disregarding tactical realities—" She paused, letting the threat hang silently in the air. "We risk a failure." Mark's chest heaved. Every instinct screamed to assert dominance, to remind her she was a subordinate, a trainee. Yet every instinct also whispered a dangerous truth. She was right. The rest of the platoon froze. Some shifted nervously, glancing from one officer to the other, sensing a storm brewing. Mark's pride, a fortress of self-assurance built over years of military command, was being chipped away, brick by this calm, unassuming woman. "You've got a lot of nerve," he muttered under his breath. Then louder, "When I give an order, it is followed. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," she said softly. But there was a subtle inflection in her tone, respectful, but not submissive. Her voice suggested obedience to reason, not rank. It infuriated him further. Mark turned on his heel, storming past her, trying to regain control. The exercise continued, but every command he issued now felt hollow, undermined by her quiet competence. She was not a threat in the usual sense. She didn't yell, or challenge him publicly, or display arrogance. But every move she made reminded him of one uncomfortable fact: she was better. Hours passed under the punishing sun. The air was electric, tense with the friction of authority and defiance. During a particularly complicated breach drill, crawling through a narrow corridor, under simulated gunfire, Ava saved 2 recruits who had been misaligned in formation, redirecting them with precision and calm words. Mark watched, jaw tight, as the trainees followed her lead instead of his. He stormed over, slamming his boot against the dirt. "Explain yourself. Why did you take over?" he demanded. "I'm ensuring operational success," she replied evenly. "Your approach endangered them." The words cut deeper than any physical blow could. Mark's pride flared, wounded, bruised, angry. Yet even as his chest heaved with frustration, a grudging respect began to form. This was not recklessness or arrogance. This was skill honed by experience. She wasn't just competent. She was extraordinary. The day's exercises culminated in a final simulated hostage scenario. Mark gave his orders, expecting compliance. Instead, Ava subtly repositioned the squad, anticipated threats, and moved with such confidence that the simulated enemy was neutralized faster and with fewer casualties than he could have managed. Mark felt the heat rising to his face. The humiliation was slow, creeping, inexorable. Around him, recruits whispered, glancing from him to her, sensing the reversal of authority. Every instinct he had as a leader screamed at him to assert dominance immediately. But another voice, quieter, more dangerous, whispered, "You're outmatched." He forced himself to speak, voice tight with restraint. "Report after the exercise. I want an explanation now." She looked at him calmly, not intimidated, not deferential. "You'll have it," she said, eyes steady, voice measured. But there was a subtle hint of challenge in her gaze, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. Mark clenched his fists behind his back, forcing himself to walk away. But every step was heavy. His pride had been bruised, his authority questioned. And he didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. Later, in the quiet of the debriefing hall, Mark sat at the head of the table, reviewing reports and making notes. He kept glancing toward the far end of the room where she quietly observed, her posture impeccable, her eyes alert, unshakable. He wanted to confront her, to put her in her place, but the words wouldn't come. He could sense her experience, her calm control, and he knew deep down he wasn't ready to challenge her. Not yet. That night, lying in the barracks, Mark replayed the day over and over. Every correction she had made, every command she had subtly overruled, every trainee who had looked to her for guidance instead of him. His pride throbbed like a raw wound. And yet, beneath the frustration, an unfamiliar thought stirred, admiration. He didn't want to admit it, couldn't admit it. But she had demonstrated something he had spent years chasing: instinct, precision, courage under pressure. Someone who could lead without needing to dominate, without yelling, without asserting superiority at every turn. Someone who was dangerous not because of rage, but because of control. Mark clenched his jaw and whispered under his breath, "We'll see who breaks first. We'll see who leads." Outside, the base was quiet, dust settling over the tracks of the day's chaos. But in his mind, Mark knew the real battle hadn't ended with the sunset. The tension between them was only beginning to simmer. And deep inside, a truth he refused to face gnawed at him. This wasn't a training day he could dominate with rank alone. Some challenges couldn't be solved with orders or authority. Some challenges required recognition, humility, and perhaps even a reckoning he wasn't ready for. And Ava Harris, calm, collected, dangerous in her subtlety, was the first true challenge he had faced in years. The next morning, the air on the Virginia base felt heavier than usual, charged with the tension of unfinished battles. Lieutenant Mark Reynolds arrived early, as was his habit, boots crunching against gravel, eyes scanning the field. His mind replayed yesterday's humiliations over and over, the calm defiance of the woman who had no rank, the way trainees had unconsciously turned to her for guidance, and the gnawing sensation that his authority was slipping through his fingers. He told himself today would be different. He would assert control, remind the platoon that orders came from him, and finally put this insolent soldier in her place. The problem was, she wasn't a soldier in the conventional sense. Mark could sense it, though he didn't yet know who she truly was. The day's exercises began with a high-intensity combat simulation in the sprawling mock urban compound. Smoke machines fogged the alleyways, sirens blared, and the whine of simulated gunfire echoed off the metal containers. Teams moved with precision, rifles clattering, boots stomping, shouts piercing the thick haze. Mark's voice rang out with clipped commands, sharp, authoritative, but always feeling just a beat too late. Eva moved like a shadow across the field, fluid, decisive, reading danger before it arrived. When Mark attempted to maneuver his team around an exposed street corner, she intercepted, physically placing herself between the squad and a simulated threat. "Lieutenant, that route is compromised. Your team will be pinned down," she shouted, her voice steady, carrying over the chaos. Mark's face flushed. The instinct to dominate flared inside him, hot and raw. "Step aside," he barked, advancing toward her, the heat of anger building into something almost combustible. She didn't flinch. "I can't. Your position endangers them." Mark didn't wait to hear the rest. Reflex, ego, frustration, all collided into a single impulsive action. His fist swung before thought could intervene, striking her squarely across the jaw. A sharp, resonant crack split the air. Time froze. The smoke, the shouts, the chaos of his simulation, everything vanished in that heartbeat. Mark froze, staring at her as she staggered, eyes wide for the first fraction of a second, and then narrowed into a piercing, unflinching gaze. The entire platoon stopped. Boots paused mid-step, rifles held taut. Whispers ran through the ranks like wildfire. Mark's stomach sank. This wasn't a normal trainee. The strength behind her calm, the way she absorbed the impact without collapsing, told him something terrifying. She wasn't just strong. She was trained. Highly trained. Dangerous. Lieutenant? What did you just... A trainee began, voice trembling. Mark shook his head, horror dawning. I thought... She raised a hand, brushing a lock of hair from her face, her expression unreadable. You hit me, she said quietly, her voice controlled, almost clinical. But it carried a subtle menace that froze him where he stood. Why? Mark faltered. Words failed him. Guilt, shock, disbelief, all collided in his chest. He realized, with a sinking feeling, that this wasn't a rookie mistake he could fix with an apology or a demonstration of authority. This was a career-altering, reputation-shattering moment. Her eyes bore into him, and for the first time in his life, Mark felt small in the presence of another soldier. She wasn't reacting with anger or tears. She wasn't screaming. She didn't stumble. She didn't fall. She stood tall, unwavering, like a storm calmly waiting to unleash its full force. Mark wanted to retreat, to run, to hide, but pride held him frozen. The humiliation was crushing. Not just for him, for the platoon, for the Marines who looked to him for guidance, for the image of authority he had spent years cultivating. And yet, every instinct screamed at him. You misjudged her. You underestimated her. You don't know who she is. The exercise ground to a halt as the supervising officers rushed to the scene. Smoke dissipated, leaving the acrid scent hanging in the air. Trainees whispered, casting nervous glances between the two officers, sensing the gravity of what had just occurred. Mark stepped back, finally finding his voice. Are you okay? He stammered. The words sounded pathetic, weak, even to his own ears. She tilted her head slightly, assessing him. I'm fine, she said, though her calm tone didn't mask the intensity behind it. But you need to think before striking. Her words struck him harder than his own fist could have struck her. In that moment, he realized two truths. 1. He had crossed a line that could not be unseen. 2. He had no idea who he had just hit, and it could be the most dangerous mistake of his life. The other trainees tried to fill the silence with nervous chatter, but she silenced them with a glance. Mark felt the weight of her presence, like a physical force pressing down on him. This wasn't a drill anymore. Not in any sense he understood. Later, in the debriefing room, Mark's hands shook slightly as he signed reports, the adrenaline finally giving way to a cold, creeping dread. He kept glancing toward her. She sat with perfect posture, her jaw already recovering, eyes calm as if nothing had happened, but he knew better. Every measured breath she took, every subtle shift of her shoulders, radiated control, power, and experience. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just faced a force he wasn't prepared for. And the worst part? He had provoked it. When the commanding officer entered the room, Mark's stomach sank further. Lieutenant Reynolds, the officer said, voice measured but heavy with authority. Report, now, and explain what happened out there. Mark opened his mouth, but no words came. He felt exposed, vulnerable, the very antithesis of command. The officer's gaze shifted to the woman beside him, calm, unreadable, and suddenly, Mark's chest tightened with the realization. She was no ordinary trainee. She had the aura of someone who had survived impossible situations. Someone whose skills were forged in real combat, not just drills. Someone he could not underestimate again. She spoke quietly, deliberately. He struck me. Her eyes flicked to Mark, unnecessarily. Out of pride. Out of ego. Not judgment. Mark felt a flush of shame rise to his cheeks. The room seemed to shrink around him, the weight of every rank, every expectation, every rule pressing down. And through it all, she remained calm, controlled, the eye of the storm he had just walked into. As he left the debriefing room, Mark's mind raced. Every step on the gravel felt heavier, every sound of wind in the trees louder. He realized he had miscalculated in the most fundamental way possible. He had treated a master as a trainee, and the consequences, though not physical, were immediate and terrifying. Outside, the base stretched silent and foreboding under the afternoon sun. Mark paused, taking a deep breath, the taste of dust and adrenaline lingering in his mouth. He clenched his fists, jaw tight, and whispered under his breath, "Who are you?" For the first time, he understood something he had never admitted before. In the military, as in life, authority alone did not guarantee control. Some challenges required more than rank. Some adversaries could not be subdued by pride, anger, or force. And Lieutenant Reynolds had just met one. The next morning, the base was quieter than usual, almost ominous. A thin fog lingered over the training fields, curling around crates and metal containers like smoke from yesterday's drills, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Lieutenant Mark Reynolds approached the command building with a mix of dread and unresolved tension gnawing at his gut. Every step felt heavier, every breath sharper. Yesterday's strike, impulsive, unforgivable, reckless, replayed in his mind like a broken recording. He had not slept. He had not eaten. All he could do was run scenarios over and over, thinking through how to apologize, how to explain, how to mitigate the damage. But deep down, he feared some damage could not be undone. As he entered the command office, the air felt thicker. Papers were stacked neatly on the desk. Officers moved with unusual precision, and the usual hum of base life seemed muted. At the far end of the room stood the woman Eva. Only this time, she was no longer wearing the standard issue training fatigues. She stood tall, her posture flawless, in a pristine Navy SEAL uniform. The gold trident of a SEAL officer gleamed on her chest, insignia perfectly aligned over her heart. Rank displayed clearly, Lieutenant Commander. Mark froze mid-step, the weight of realization crushing him like a tidal wave. The woman he had struck in a moment of frustration, the one he had misjudged, disrespected, and humiliated, was not a trainee at all. She was a decorated, highly trained Navy SEAL, one of the best. "Lieutenant Reynolds," the base commander said, his tone calm but loaded. "Report, now." Mark swallowed hard, throat dry, heart pounding. Words stumbled over one another in his mind. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Nothing felt adequate. Not an apology. Not an explanation. Not a justification. Eva stepped forward, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that held him captive. "Lieutenant Reynolds," she said, voice calm, measured, but carrying the weight of authority that no rank could fake. "Yesterday, you struck me. Out of frustration. Out of ego. Out of pride." Mark's chest tightened. He wanted to speak, but no words came. He could feel the color draining from his face. The reality of what he had done hit him with terrifying clarity. "I didn't know," he whispered finally, barely audible, voice shaking. "I didn't know who you." Ava's gaze cut through him. "No," she said softly, yet firmly. "You did not know. And that is why you must learn. Leadership is not about dominance. Authority is not proof of skill. And pride is a dangerous weapon in untrained hands." Her calmness was infuriating and humbling all at once. Mark's mind reeled. He had trained countless recruits, commanded squads, led operations. He had been respected, feared even, for his decisiveness and authority. And yet here she stood, unflinching, composed, and holding him accountable with nothing but a measured look. The base commander continued, voice steady. "Lieutenant Reynolds, you have made a mistake. One we must address formally. But Lieutenant Commander Harris requests that we treat this as a learning experience." Mark looked at Eva, his mind racing. Learning experience? After hitting a Navy SEAL? After humiliating himself in front of his platoon? He wanted to argue, to protest, to retreat into excuses. But he knew, every instinct told him, that she would see through it instantly. Eva tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Mistakes are inevitable," she said. "What defines a leader is how quickly you recognize them, how honestly you assess them, and how diligently you correct them. Yesterday, you failed yourself. Today, you have the opportunity to fail better." Mark's pride screamed inside him, but a seed of understanding took root. She was not cruel. She was precise, methodical, uncompromising. Her judgment was not personal. It was tactical, measured, and deserved. The silence stretched. Other officers shifted, sensing the magnitude of the moment. Mark's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. He could feel sweat prickling his temples despite the cool air of the office. Every muscle in his body was taut with tension. Finally, he exhaled slowly, forcing his voice to steady. "Lieutenant Commander Harris." You don't need to apologize yet," she interrupted gently. "You need to understand. Every action has consequences. Every failure leaves a mark, sometimes on others, sometimes on yourself. Yesterday, you learned the hard way." Mark nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. The weight of realization pressed down on him like a stone. He had not only misjudged her ability, but also misjudged the very nature of respect, authority, and skill. Eva turned slightly, indicating the doorway. "Report to your platoon. Resume your exercises. And observe carefully. Leadership is more than orders. Watch, learn, and understand what it truly means to lead." Mark felt a mix of shame and awe. He could hardly speak, but he knew this was a pivotal moment. The woman he had struck, a Navy SEAL, a warrior trained for life and death decisions, had spared him humiliation beyond measure. She had offered him guidance without anger, without retaliation, but with the precision of a mentor and the authority of someone who had seen it all. As he left the office, the weight in his chest was both heavy and strangely liberating. The base corridor seemed narrower, the air heavier, but his mind was clear. Every step back to the field was measured, thoughtful. He knew that his approach to leadership, to authority, to discipline, would have to change radically. Back on the training ground, he watched her silently. Eva Harris moved among the recruits with effortless authority, correcting positions, giving advice, and issuing instructions that carried weight because they were earned, not demanded. She was a living example of leadership in its purest form. Calm under pressure, fearless, decisive, and respected without needing to force compliance. Mark's eyes followed her, and for the first time, he felt both humbled and challenged. He had always believed that rank and authority were enough. Now, he realized they were not. Respect had to be earned through competence, integrity, and courage. That evening, in the solitude of his quarters, Mark replayed the moment over and over. The strike, her calm response, the revelation of her SEAL status, the quiet lesson she imparted without a single raised voice. Every replay was a painful reminder of his impulsiveness, and every replay also became a lesson he could not ignore. He knew, without a doubt, that things would never be the same. Eva Harris had not only exposed his misjudgment, but she had shown him a level of skill, discipline, and authority he had never encountered. And in doing so, she had forced him to confront a truth that rank alone could never teach. Leadership demanded more than pride, more than orders, and certainly more than anger. Mark clenched his fists again, this time with determination. Tomorrow, he would return to the field. And this time, he would observe. He would listen. He would learn. Because he had seen in Eva Harris what true skill and authority looked like. And he could no longer afford to underestimate it. The news spread through the base like wildfire. By mid-morning, whispers had become murmurs. Murmurs had become hushed conversations. And those hushed conversations had grown into full-blown gossip among trainees and junior officers alike. Every recruit who had been present during yesterday's incident knew what had happened, and every one of them now treated Mark Reynolds with a mixture of disbelief and caution. He had hit a Navy SEAL, and everyone knew it. Mark moved through the corridors, trying to maintain the facade of authority, but it was crumbling under the weight of curiosity, judgment, and unspoken ridicule. Every glance seemed to linger longer than necessary, every salute slightly delayed, every greeting slightly hesitant. Even the most loyal members of his platoon avoided his eyes. Pride, carefully cultivated over years of service, felt brittle, fragile, like dry parchment ready to crack. Eva, meanwhile, continued her duties with serene precision. She never acknowledged the whispers, never flaunted her rank, never criticized his performance. She moved among the recruits, giving instructions, correcting errors, and observing the drills as if nothing had happened. Yet her presence carried a quiet, undeniable authority. Mark watched her from a distance, the knowing mixture of respect and shame twisting inside him. He wanted to confront her, to apologize, to explain, but every time he tried, the words stuck in his throat, inadequate and meaningless. During a mid-morning briefing, Mark sat in silence while Eva presented tactical strategies to the assembled trainees and officers. Her voice was calm but firm, articulating risks and contingencies with a clarity that left no room for doubt. Every point she made was backed by experience, foresight, and logic. Mark found himself listening more than speaking, taking mental notes while his pride screamed at him to assert dominance, to reclaim control. After the briefing, he pulled one of his lieutenants aside. "Do you know who she really is?" he asked quietly. "Of course, sir," the lieutenant replied, eyes wary. "She's a SEAL, highly decorated. Special operations. Only a handful of people even know she's here." Mark's stomach dropped. He had spent decades building respect and authority, and yet here he was, embarrassed, humiliated, and outmatched by someone whose presence he had initially dismissed. The lieutenant lowered his voice further. "Sir, she's evaluating leadership, not just in your platoon, but in the joint exercise itself. What you did. It's a big deal." Mark exhaled slowly, running a hand over his face. "I know," he muttered. "I know." The words felt hollow, even to himself. The rest of the day was a haze of exercises, drills, and tactical simulations. Mark noticed how the recruits now watched him differently. Some avoided eye contact, unsure how to navigate their own respect for rank versus their growing awareness of Eva's authority. Others, braver or more naive, still tried to follow his commands without hesitation. But it was clear that yesterday's incident had shifted the balance of perceived competence. During a brief break in the afternoon, Mark found himself alone in the training yard, staring at the distant tree line, trying to collect his thoughts. He replayed every detail of yesterday, the look in her eyes after the strike, the stillness of her posture, the weight of her calm presence. He knew he had crossed a line, and that line was now indelible. Pride and authority had collided, and pride had lost. Eva approached quietly, her footsteps soft against the gravel. Mark turned, startled, but she only nodded in acknowledgement before speaking. "Lieutenant Reynolds," she said, her tone calm and measured, "I want you to understand something. Leadership is not about punishing mistakes or asserting dominance. It's about guiding, correcting, and learning, sometimes from those you least expect. Mark's jaw tightened. I know, he replied, his voice low, rough with frustration. She studied him for a moment, then continued. Yesterday, you acted on impulse. That is human. But the consequences of action without understanding can be devastating. Today, you have an opportunity. Observe, learn, lead wisely. Fail better. He nodded slowly, a mixture of shame and gratitude stirring inside him. For the first time, he realized that Ava's purpose was not to humiliate him, but to teach him. Her methods were harsh, indirect, and precise, a reflection of her own discipline, honed through years of real combat experience. The platoon resumed exercises, and Mark followed Ava's guidance more closely than his own instincts. He observed her methods, her decisiveness, her calm authority under pressure. Every movement was deliberate, every word carefully chosen. The recruits responded instinctively to her, not because of rank alone, but because of competence and confidence. Mark realized, painfully, that competence commanded respect far more effectively than authority ever could. As the day wore on, Mark's internal struggle became evident. He wanted to reclaim his authority, to reassert his dominance, but every attempt felt clumsy compared to Ava's effortless command. The lesson was bitter, unavoidable, and profoundly humbling. He recognized that his pride had blinded him to the true meaning of leadership, and that every moment he spent resisting this truth was another opportunity lost. By evening, the base was quieter again. Mark walked alone to the observation tower, surveying the field where the day's exercises had taken place. Trainees moved under the fading light, their movements disciplined but cautious, aware of both his and Ava's presence. He reflected on the ripple effects of a single impulsive act, the way one strike had shifted perception, altered respect, and reshaped relationships within the platoon. Later, in the quiet of his quarters, Mark sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the ceiling, replaying every interaction with Ava. Her calm authority, her measured responses, her ability to command without force, all of it haunted him. And yet, amid the shame and guilt, there was a spark of understanding. He began to see a path forward, a way to rebuild credibility not through force, but through observation, humility, and growth. He knew one thing for certain: his relationship with Ava Harris, the woman he had struck, the SEAL whose authority he had underestimated, would define the next chapter of his career. Every decision, every command, every interaction would now be measured against the standard she had set. And for the first time, Mark welcomed the challenge. Somewhere, deep in his core, he realized that respect was not demanded. It was earned, carefully, deliberately, and sometimes painfully. Ava Harris had just given him the harshest, most precise lesson of his life, and he knew he would never forget it. As darkness fell over the base, Mark looked out over the training grounds, the orange glow of the setting sun casting long shadows across the dusty fields. He clenched his fists, jaw tight, mind sharp with determination. He would learn. He would adapt. He would regain the respect he had lost, not through force, but through understanding, competence, and unwavering commitment. And in the quiet moments before sleep, he whispered to himself, "I will not make that mistake again. Not with her. Not with anyone." The alarm pierced the quiet of the base before dawn. A real-world crisis had erupted, a hostage situation along the Gulf Coast. Intelligence reported heavily armed insurgents holding civilians in a coastal facility. The mission parameters were fluid, dangerous, and unpredictable. This was no simulation. No drills. Lives were at stake. Lieutenant Mark Reynolds was jolted awake by the urgent summons. His heart pounded with a mix of adrenaline, fear, and anticipation. For weeks, he had wrestled with humiliation, guilt, and self-reflection. But this was real. And at the center of it stood Eva Harris, calm, collected, already briefing the team in full tactical gear. Mark approached her with measured steps, conscious of every movement. He tried to steel himself for the day ahead, but nothing could prepare him for the reality of working alongside someone he had previously struck in a moment of pride and misjudgment. "Lieutenant Reynolds," Eva said without looking up from her map. "We move in 20 minutes. Your role is clear. Follow protocol, follow orders, and trust your team." Her tone was neutral, professional, but the weight behind her words left no room for argument. Mark nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. He had spent the last weeks learning the hard truth. Authority without competence was meaningless. Now, the test would be literal, life or death. The convoy departed in darkness, vehicles rolling over rough terrain, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn haze. Mark's hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles white. Every muscle in his body was alert. He could sense Ava's presence beside him, composed and uncheckable, scanning the maps, running contingencies, coordinating with other units via secure comms. "Intel reports 4 hostiles in the main building," Eva said, voice calm but precise. "They're heavily armed. Snipers on the rooftops. Civilian movement restricted to the southern corridor. Approach with caution. Timing is critical." Mark exhaled slowly, trying to steady himself. "Understood," he replied. His voice sounded more confident than he felt. He glanced at her, noting the calm authority that had previously infuriated him. Now it inspired him, demanded respect, and silently he acknowledged it. The convoy halted on a ridge overlooking the coastal facility. From this vantage point, Mark could see the insurgents moving in calculated patterns, armed and alert. Civilians huddled in fear, shadows trembling under the rising sun. The stakes were immediate, brutal, and unforgiving. Eva rose, scanning the terrain with an almost preternatural calm. "Team Alpha with me. Lieutenant Reynolds, you lead Team Bravo. Support, secure exit points, coordinate evac. Any deviation from protocol jeopardizes lives." Mark swallowed. The pressure was immense. He had to navigate not only the threat, but also his own lingering pride and fear of making another critical mistake. Every instinct screamed to assert authority, but he knew now that following Ava's lead might be the difference between life and death. The assault began. Smoke grenades detonated, shrouding the building in a haze. Shots rang out, echoing off concrete and metal. Chaos reigned. Mark moved with precision, directing his team, watching for threats. Ava was everywhere at once, moving, guiding, correcting, yet never shouting, never panicking, always in control. An explosion rocked the facility, sending debris flying. Mark instinctively shielded himself, and those around him, adrenaline spiking. When he looked up, he saw Ava unscathed, directing Team Alpha with the clarity of someone who had been in far worse situations. Her eyes met his across the smoke-filled yard, and in that glance, a silent message passed. "Trust me. Trust yourself." During a tense moment, one of the hostages attempted to flee and ran directly into an insurgent's line of fire. Mark lunged instinctively, grabbing the civilian and pulling them to safety. Another shot rang out, and shrapnel grazed his arm. Pain lanced through him, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to let it break focus. "Lieutenant Reynolds." Ava's voice cut through the chaos. "South corridor. Civilians are being moved. We cover the exit." Mark nodded, adrenaline overriding pain. Together, the two units coordinated seamlessly. Orders were followed, threats neutralized, and hostages guided to safety. Mark watched Eva in awe. Her calm decisiveness, her ability to maintain awareness under extreme stress, and her capacity to lead without needing to dominate, it was extraordinary. At one point, Mark found himself separated from Eva by a collapsing stairwell. Insurgents moved to flank him. Panic flared, but he remembered her lessons: observe, calculate, act. He used cover, adjusted his angle, neutralized the threat, and signaled the team forward. It was textbook execution, and he felt, for the first time, that he was operating as a competent leader rather than a pride-driven officer. After nearly an hour of controlled chaos, the situation stabilized. All hostages were accounted for. Insurgents were neutralized or detained. The mission was a success. Mark leaned against the wall of the facility, catching his breath, arm throbbing from the shrapnel graze. He glanced toward Eva, who was coordinating the extraction with the same calm precision that had guided every move. She approached him, eyes scanning for any signs of compromise. "Are you injured?" she asked, noting the bandage forming on his arm. "Nothing critical," he replied, wincing slightly. "Thanks for covering me. And for everything else." Eva nodded, her expression unreadable but approving. "You acted well under pressure. That's what counts. Authority without competence is meaningless, but competence under pressure, that's leadership. Today, you demonstrated both." Mark exhaled slowly, feeling a mix of relief, pride, and humility. The mission had not only tested tactical skills, but also character, judgment, and trust. And through it all, he realized the truth he had been struggling to accept for weeks. Leadership was not about ego or dominance. It was about trust, competence, and the courage to follow when necessary. As the extraction helicopters lifted off, carrying hostages to safety, Mark watched Eva one last time before climbing into his vehicle. The woman he had struck, misjudged, and underestimated had just saved lives. And indirectly, he had learned the hardest lesson of his career. The sun rose higher over the Gulf Coast, casting long shadows across the facility. Mark sat in silence, letting the realization sink in. He had survived the mission, yes, but more importantly, he had begun to transform. The humility, the respect, the understanding of what true leadership required, it was all etched into his mind now, indelibly, permanently. Eva moved among the evacuated civilians, her presence calm, steady, and authoritative. Mark watched her from a distance, understanding fully that he had been given a rare opportunity, not only to witness true skill, but to learn from it firsthand. And he vowed, silently, that he would never waste another chance. The mission was over, but the lessons, the trust, the respect earned and challenged that day, those would last a lifetime. The evening sun dipped low over the base, casting long shadows across the training fields. Lieutenant Mark Reynolds sat alone in the observation tower, staring at the fading light as it shimmered across the horizon. The hum of activity from the day's mission still lingered in the air, a quiet reminder that the crisis had passed. But for Mark, the real mission, the one he had been fighting all along, was internal. Weeks of tension, humiliation, and self-doubt had culminated in today's operation. The success of the mission had not only saved lives, but also illuminated the stark contrast between authority and leadership. Mark had learned painfully that his rank alone did not define him. It was his competence, his decisions, his ability to act under pressure, and most importantly, his willingness to learn from those around him, even those he had previously underestimated. Eva Harris approached quietly, her presence still commanding, even in the soft light of dusk. Mark did not need to turn to know she was there. Her footsteps, silent but precise, were as familiar as the rhythm of the field itself. "Lieutenant Reynolds," she said, her voice calm, carrying the weight of authority without arrogance. "The debrief will begin shortly, but I wanted to speak with you first." Mark turned slowly, meeting her gaze. There was no judgment, no bitterness, only a quiet, unwavering focus that demanded respect. "Yes, Lieutenant Commander," he replied, his tone steady, though not without humility. Eva nodded slightly. "You performed well today. Under extreme pressure, with unexpected variables, you made the right calls. You protected your team, secured the hostages, and adapted to changing circumstances. That is leadership in its purest form." Mark exhaled, a mix of relief and pride washing over him. "Thank you," he said softly. "I couldn't have done it without your guidance, without your example." Her expression remained calm, but there was a subtle acknowledgement, almost imperceptible, that passed between them. "Leadership is about learning, Reynolds," she said. "It is not a title. It is not rank. It is action, observation, and reflection. And you are beginning to understand that." Mark nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink deep into his consciousness. For years, he had relied on authority to command respect, on rank to assert control, on ego to mask uncertainty. Now, he realized how fragile that facade had been. True leadership required more: awareness, humility, courage, and the ability to act decisively while remaining open to guidance. The debrief began shortly afterward. Mark observed Eva as she led the discussion, breaking down the mission with meticulous detail. Every decision, every maneuver, every success and near mistake was analyzed with precision. She encouraged input from the team, acknowledged errors without blame, and highlighted lessons learned with clarity and purpose. Mark listened carefully, noting the differences between her approach and his own. She did not need to dominate or assert authority. Her competence commanded respect naturally. Her calm decisiveness inspired confidence. Her focus on outcomes, rather than ego, created an environment where others could perform at their best. As the debrief concluded, Eva approached Mark once more. "Tomorrow, we return to training," she said. "But remember this: your success today was not because you acted alone. It was because you understood when to lead, when to follow, and when to trust. Never forget that." Mark met her gaze, a quiet determination burning in his eyes. "I won't," he said firmly. "I understand now." The following weeks were a period of transformation. Mark approached every exercise, every drill, every interaction with a renewed sense of purpose. He observed before acting, listened before issuing orders, and measured his decisions against competence rather than ego. Slowly, the platoon began to notice the change. Commands were followed with respect, trust was rebuilt, and the unit's cohesion strengthened. Eva remained a constant presence, guiding silently, correcting subtly, and allowing Mark the space to grow. She did not coddle him, nor did she allow mistakes to go unaddressed. Her mentorship was precise, exacting, and demanding, a reflection of the discipline and skill that defined her as a Navy SEAL. One afternoon, during a particularly challenging tactical exercise, Mark found himself facing a decision that would test everything he had learned. A simulated hostage was trapped in a burning building, smoke and flames blocking the usual exit. His team looked to him for direction, uncertainty evident in their eyes. Mark paused, recalling Eva's lessons: observe, calculate, act. He assessed the situation, considered alternative approaches, and made a decision that balanced risk and reward. Orders were given with clarity, movements coordinated with precision, and the team executed flawlessly. The simulated hostage was rescued, and the exercise concluded without injury or error. Eva approached afterward, a faint smile breaking her usually composed demeanor. "Well done, Lieutenant Reynolds," she said. "You acted decisively, observed carefully, and led effectively. That is progress. True leadership is measured by results under pressure, and today you demonstrated growth." Mark felt a swell of pride, tempered by humility. He knew he still had much to learn, but for the first time, he understood what it meant to earn respect through competence, courage, and thoughtful action. That evening, as he reviewed the day's events, Mark reflected on the journey he had undergone. The strike, the humiliation, the mission, and Ava's mentorship had forced him to confront his limitations, his ego, and his understanding of leadership. He realized that the hardest lessons often came through failure, and that growth required both courage and humility. He thought back to the moment he had struck Eva, the shock on her face, the calm authority she had displayed despite the blow. That moment had been a catalyst, a turning point that had reshaped his approach, his mindset, and his understanding of what it truly meant to lead. Mark knew that his relationship with Eva would never be conventional. Their dynamic was defined by mutual respect, tempered by past mistakes, and strengthened by shared experience. She had challenged him, guided him, and ultimately transformed him into a better leader. As the base settled into quiet night, Mark stood on the observation deck, looking out over the training fields. The moon cast a silver glow over the landscape, illuminating the paths, obstacles, and open spaces. He felt a sense of clarity he had never experienced before, a deep understanding of responsibility, trust, and the true essence of leadership. In that moment, he silently vowed to carry these lessons forward, not only in his military career, but in every decision, every interaction, every life he influenced. He knew that leadership was not about titles, rank, or ego. It was about action, integrity, competence, and the courage to learn from those around him, even those he had once underestimated. And as he glanced toward Eva, observing her from a distance as she guided the platoon with calm authority, Mark understood something profound. Respect was earned through skill, trust was built through action, and true leadership was measured not by what one commanded, but by what one inspired. He took a deep breath, the weight of past mistakes lifting slightly, replaced by determination, humility, and the resolve to lead not through force, but through competence and example. The journey was far from over. Challenges would continue to arise. Difficult decisions would test his resolve, and moments of doubt would inevitably surface. But Mark Reynolds now faced the future armed with the hardest-earned lesson of his life. That true leadership is forged in the crucible of experience, tempered by humility and validated through action. And with Eva Harris, Navy SEAL, mentor, and unflinching force of nature, guiding, observing, and challenging him, Mark was finally ready to meet that future head-on. The dawn broke over the base like a promise of renewal. Sunlight glinted off the training fields, illuminating the obstacles, vehicles, and pathways where countless lessons had been learned. Lieutenant Mark Reynolds stood at attention, watching as the platoon moved with synchronized precision, a culmination of weeks of training, observation, and growth. The transformation was undeniable in the soldiers, in himself, and most significantly, in the way authority and respect had reshaped the base's atmosphere. Eva Harris observed from the command post, her gaze sharp but approving. Today was not a test in the conventional sense. There would be no simulations, no drills. Today was a culmination, a moment to see how far Mark had come, not only as a leader, but as a student of leadership itself. Mark approached her, the morning air crisp against his skin. There was no awkwardness now, no tension of past mistakes. Only mutual respect, forged through shared experience and tempered by trials. "Lieutenant Commander Harris," he said, voice steady and respectful. I just wanted to say thank you for everything. For guidance, for lessons, and for showing me what leadership really means." Eva regarded him silently for a moment, her expression unreadable, before offering the faintest nod. "Acknowledgement is only the first step, Lieutenant Reynolds. Understanding, application, and consistency define growth. You've demonstrated that today, but the journey continues. Mark nodded, feeling the weight of her words sink deep. He had learned that leadership was not a destination, but a continuous process of adaptation, reflection, and accountability. Every decision, every action, every moment of indecision or courage would contribute to the person he was becoming. The day's exercises began with a full-scale coordination drill, blending tactical maneuvers, hostage rescue simulations, and rapid response exercises. Mark moved among his team with calm authority, issuing precise instructions, observing, correcting, and empowering his soldiers to act decisively. There was no need for ego, no need for force, only clarity, competence, and trust. Eva monitored the operation closely, stepping in only when absolutely necessary, her presence a subtle but unwavering anchor. Mark noticed the difference in himself. He no longer felt the compulsion to dominate or prove himself. Instead, he led with thoughtfulness, awareness, and confidence, drawing on every lesson she had imparted. During a simulated extraction scenario, Mark faced a critical decision. Two options presented themselves. One guaranteed the fastest route, but carried higher risk for casualties. The other was safer, but slower, potentially jeopardizing the mission's timing. He paused, recalling Ava's guidance. Observe, calculate, and act decisively, balancing risk and reward. Mark issued his orders calmly, explaining the rationale to his team. The maneuver was executed flawlessly. Hostages were rescued, threats neutralized, and the exercise concluded with impressive efficiency. The platoon looked to him with respect, not just for rank, but for competence, calm judgment, and decisive leadership under pressure. Eva approached after the exercise, her stance relaxed, but her eyes keen. "Well done," she said. "You made a choice that balanced risk and responsibility. You led your team effectively. That is the hallmark of a true leader, not the desire to dominate, but the ability to guide wisely." Mark exhaled, a mixture of relief and pride coursing through him. He felt the culmination of weeks of reflection, growth, and hard-earned humility. Today had proven to him, and to his platoon, that he had internalized the lessons Ava had imparted. Authority, when combined with competence, trust, and decisiveness, could inspire confidence and cohesion. As the day progressed, the exercises shifted to team leadership rotations. Mark observed as Ava provided subtle guidance to each officer, correcting errors, emphasizing situational awareness, and fostering critical thinking. He noticed her approach differed from his former methods. She did not demand obedience. She did not assert dominance. She did not rely on fear or pride. Instead, she cultivated respect through skill, clarity, and consistent demonstration of competence. By the afternoon, Mark was called to lead a final exercise, a leave-fire scenario requiring split-second decisions, coordination with multiple units, and protection of simulated civilians under heavy threat. His pulse quickened, but he was ready. He relied not on ego or authority, but on training, observation, and lessons learned from Ava's mentorship. The operation unfolded with tension and intensity. Insurgents advanced, smoke filled the training compound, and chaos reigned, yet Mark remained composed. Orders were precise, teams moved in synchronized fashion, and threats were neutralized efficiently. Hostages were rescued, injuries avoided, and the operation concluded successfully. Afterward, as the soldiers celebrated their success, Eva approached Mark. The sun was low on the horizon, casting a warm glow over the base. She regarded him with a subtle, approving nod. "Lieutenant Reynolds," she said, her tone calm but deliberate, "you have demonstrated growth, competence, and leadership under pressure. You have learned to balance authority with awareness, ego with humility, and action with observation. These are the qualities that define a true leader. Never forget them." Mark met her gaze, gratitude and understanding radiating from him. "I won't," he replied firmly. "Thank you for everything, for challenging me, guiding me, and showing me what leadership truly means." Ava's lips curved into the faintest smile, a rare acknowledgement of his progress. "Leadership is a journey, Reynolds," she said. "Today, you've taken another step. Keep walking it carefully, wisely, and with courage." In the weeks that followed, the base returned to routine operations. Mark continued to lead with newfound clarity, humility, and confidence. The platoon's cohesion strengthened, morale improved, and respect for his authority, now tempered by competence rather than mere rank, solidified. Mark reflected often on the moment that had started it all, the impulsive strike that had shattered his pride. He realized now that without that mistake, without the humiliation, without the confrontation with Eva Harris, he may never have reached this level of understanding. What had begun as a moment of error had evolved into a catalyst for profound personal and professional transformation. Eva remained at the base for several more weeks, continuing her mentorship subtly, guiding without overt control, observing without interference, challenging without confrontation. Her presence was both grounding and inspiring, and Mark came to rely on her counsel, not out of fear, but out of respect for her experience, judgment, and skill. Eventually, Ava departed, returning to active deployment with her SEAL unit. The day she left, Mark watched from the base perimeter as her helicopter lifted into the sky. He felt a mixture of pride, gratitude, and a quiet, enduring respect. She had transformed him, not with punishment or humiliation, but through mentorship, guidance, and the demonstration of true leadership. Mark turned back to the base, watching his platoon train with renewed energy and focus. He understood now that leadership was not a static title or a collection of orders. It was earned through action, tempered by humility, and measured by competence and trust. The lessons he had learned from Eva Harris would remain with him forever, guiding every decision, every command, and every interaction he would have for the rest of his career. And as the sun set over the training fields, painting the sky with hues of gold and crimson, Mark Reynolds felt a profound sense of completion. He had faced failure, humiliation, and doubt, and emerged not only as a better officer, but as a better leader, a more self-aware human being, and someone capable of guiding others with both authority and wisdom. The woman he had once struck, the Navy SEAL whose presence had challenged and reshaped him, had given him the most valuable lesson of all, that true strength lies not in pride or rank, but in competence, integrity, and the courage to learn and grow. Mark stood tall, shoulders squared, gaze steady, and whispered quietly to himself, "I will lead with honor. I will lead with wisdom. I will never forget what I've learned." And with that, he returned to his platoon, ready to face the future, fully aware, fully prepared, and forever changed.